It's all up to you.
Not yet? There it is. Excellent. Very good. Hello and welcome. My name is Mike. My call sign is K0NGA. I do this presentation, it seems like once or twice a year now. Some of my background, I've been in RMHAM almost 10 years now. And DMR is what got me into amateur radio. Right, so started out like most other people, kind of experimented around with it, but it wasn't until DMR came along that I really dug in. It's something that I really love and enjoy. I love digital radios. I'm sorry? Okay. Well, there I am. Very cool. So what we're going to go over today is a programming workshop. So this is meant to be interactive. Before we just did a big presentation, and that was fun, but it was kind of boring. So we're going to try to make this interactive. Unfortunately, I've had some hardware hiccups on the way in. So some of the stuff I had planned to do today, we're not going to be able to do, but everything else we'll be able to do. So let's start out the presentation the way that I start out all of my DMR presentations, with a little something I like to call the DMR doctrine. And it's called the doctrine because it starts with D, and it's an alliteration. It's a lot of fun, okay? So how many people here do not yet have a DMR radio? Okay, and those on Zoom, you can use your hand, you can do the hand thing in Zoom to say you do not have your radio yet. Okay, everybody here has a radio. Not sure we're going on Zoom. Okay. So if you've been to one of my presentations, you've heard me say this before. If you're new to DMR or new to amateur radio, this slide is for you. Okay. So the first thing to understand about DMR as an amateur radio enthusiast is that DMR is a commercial radio protocol. Key word in that sentence is commercial. It was never designed or intended for amateur radio use. Okay? Some things about DMR as an amateur radio person are not going to make sense. Okay? Accept this. It will make your life easier. Okay? Don't argue with it. Don't push back against it, because it is what it is. There were times when DMR was first taking off in amateur radio. We have a lot of stories about this earlier on, where you had some well-established individuals within the amateur radio community, not necessarily here in the Denver area, but would actually call me as I was doing one of the presentations, like, why don't they just change the names of these things? Why don't they just do this? Why don't they just do that? And I always point them back to this first statement. DMR is not an amateur radio protocol. It's a commercial radio protocol, and that is not going to change, right? We'll go over this a little bit in the basics bit, but it was not designed for us. We are shoehorning it into our amateur radio world. And if we're going to do that, we have to be ready to accept the way that DMR does things, and that applies specifically and especially in the world of programming. Now, if you think this is wild, just wait until we get into a little bit here into the presentation, because it gets even better. But this is the first thing to go over when we start talking about DMR. And this is weird because most of my audience is actually on Zoom. Now, if you have any questions and you're on the Zoom, please put the question. Are you doing Q&A or are you just doing chat? Yeah. So either in the Q&A or chat, put a question in there, and they will interrupt me to ask the question. Huh? Okay. So you need to do that in chat, or put your hand up to do voice if you want to do a voice question. All right, so what are we going to do today? The first thing I want you guys to do, because this was going to be the exercise, so this is going to be the sample that we do. Write this down. If you want to participate in the programming example, write this down. So the first thing, so this is some information on a channel. And if this doesn't make sense to you because you're new, that's fine. It doesn't have to. It will by the end of the presentation. I'll give you a couple of minutes to get this written down. You can also download the slides from the website in PDF form. Course syllabus or syllabus or something like that. Okay. Or 38.6 megahertz minus, color code 1, time slot 2, talk group 310801. If I hadn't had my equipment issues this morning, this would be even more meaningful, but it'll be what it'll be. All right. Moving on. Today's agenda. Yes, Willem. Yes. Today's agenda, we're going to go over some basics of DMR, because we always do. We're going to talk about vendor differences and CPS differences very briefly. And then we're going to dive into the programming, what you need to know, and workflow, because the workflow matters. Not necessarily because you're going to trip yourself up, but because it'll keep you from tearing your hair out. And I'm still amazed that I have as much hair on my head as I do after going through some of these exercises early on in my DMR career, because it can be frustrating, and depending on which radio and which CPS you're using, it can be extraordinarily frustrating. So let's start with the basics review. This is one of my favorite quotes from myself. Because people find out that I'm in computers, like I do something with computer related for work. So, oh, can you come and look at my computer? No. $500 an hour. That's ridiculous. Yes, it is, for a reason. All right. So, what is DMR? Is the first question we go over because it's relevant, obviously. There's also this term turbo. You don't hear turbos much in the parlance anymore, but early on you did, and it caused some confusion. So, what is DMR? Oddly enough, DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. Very boring. But that's what DMR is, Digital Mobile Radio. It's an international commercial, there's that word again, digital radio standard that originated in Europe. Not even American. Ugh. Right?
Probably Russian.
No. Thank goodness for that. Now, turbo, TRBO, refers to Moto Turbo, which is Motorola's implementation of the DMR standard. Okay, so they brand their DMR stuff as Moto Turbo. That's kind of where that comes in. Okay. Now, many of the repeater networks out there, including RMHAMs, use Moto Turbo equipment. So there's some, in the early days especially, they were referred to as turbo networks, which is about as useful as the turbo button on the old computers you had when you were a kid, or younger, depending on how old you are. But of course, you do not need a Motorola radio in order to operate on these turbo networks or Motorola networks. Otherwise, this class would not be necessary. Okay? It's just the DMR standard. Now, the reason why the Moto Turbo is so popular, because they added on something to the repeaters called IP Site Connect. IP Site Connect, that's what it's called, right? Which allows them within their own repeaters to interconnect them using TCP/IP, which is very, very useful. So this is not part of the DMR standard, but it is something that Motorola adds on to make the networking easier. That is very useful for us guys in amateur radio, and that's why the adoption of those particular repeaters has been so high. Okay? Why do we care? Well, when you start looking at DMR and what it brings to the table, what you realize very quickly is that there's three things intrinsic to DMR that make it very popular and very useful in amateur radio. First of all, is that since it's a commercial repeater, it's going to be narrowband. Okay, so right off the bat, because it's narrowband, if you have a wideband allocation, you can theoretically fit 2 repeaters worth of bandwidth into that one band allocation. So you can run 2 repeaters in the same space within your allocation. That's cool. Second thing is that it's digital. What does that mean? That means underneath the covers at a very fundamental level, instead of sending out just a modulated analog signal, essentially what it's doing is sending out ones and zeros. Okay? It's a digital signal, digital mobile radio, sending out ones and zeros. So when you're talking about a signal that's sending out, a repeater and let's call it an HT, talking to each other, it's much easier for that repeater to differentiate between a 1 and a 0 at a long distance than it is to be able to interpret a complicated analog signal. So what that means is that your readability stays clearer further out, okay? You don't get the hiss, you don't get the background noise because it's just 1s and 0s that it has to hear. So your signal will be really great right until it isn't, and then you'll digital out and it'll just drop. Okay, so when you get to range, you'll just start what they call going digital. You start sounding like R2D2, and then it just drops. So you stay clearer longer, right? That's the second benefit. The third benefit is that, as you see on the slide here, we use a technology to break up the repeater into 2 virtual time slots, okay? So TDMA allows you to have 2 simultaneous conversations on the same repeater pair at the same time. So you'll see these referred to as time slot 1, time slot 2, or repeater slot 1, repeater slot 2. So the repeater acts virtually like 2 separate repeaters. So now if you're running 1 analog repeater wideband in your amateur radio frequency allocation, you can now get 4, because 2 repeaters, 2 virtual repeaters each, 4 conversations going on in that same allocation at the same time. Suddenly, for us tech guys, that becomes very sexy. That is about as sexy as radio gets. Thank you for laughing at that, okay? Now, there are some new concepts, oddly enough, with DMR. Now, the first concept, of course, is not new. You still have a frequency pair. That's not new. Hallelujah, that hasn't changed. You have this thing called a color code. Funny thing about a color code, it's not a color. It's a number. It's called a color code. Why? Because that's what the spec says, okay? So the color code is kind of the first access point into the radio once you have the frequency pair in. It simulates, it functions the same way as a CTCSS tone or a DCS tone, but it's just a digital part of the packet header for those guys that know networking. So it's not a tone. It doesn't actually send out a tone. There's no tone involved, right? It's just part of the digital packet header. It's another thing that's confusing. It's like, well, if it functions like, no, it functions the same way, but it's not the same thing, okay? This allows 2 repeaters that have to share a frequency pair in a close proximity for whatever reason to be able to operate independently without knocking on each other, okay? You then have the repeater slot. Like I said before, there are 2 slots in the repeater. So you have to specify which one you're on, because if some guy is talking on repeater slot 1 and another guy is talking on repeater slot 2, they will not hear each other, okay? You have to make sure you're on the same repeater slot. And then you have a talk group. Now the talk group is a source of much consternation, confusion, discussion, debate within the amateur radio community, because you can assign and use more than 1 talk group on a repeater slot. However, for that repeater slot, you can only ever have 1 conversation going on at a time. So if you have talk group 10 and talk group 20 on the same repeater slot, and some guy's chatting away on talk group 10, you try to key up on talk group 20 on the same repeater slot, you're going to get a busy signal. So especially early on, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about how useful this really was. And it wasn't until the Brandmeister concept came online that where talk groups actually had some kind of real woohoo functionality, right? Because in the early days, it was like everybody wanted their own talk group, and then nobody could talk because everybody was talking in different talk groups. Nobody could talk to each other. It was silly. All right, any questions about the basic concepts? Any questions on the Zoom yet? Excellent. Let's move into receive groups. Now, what is a receive group? Is it an opposite of the talk group? Well, it's related to a talk group. So a receive group works on the receive side of the channel, like the talk group operates on the talk side of the transmit side of the channel. So you transmit to a talk group, And then the receive side, you assign a receive group. We talked about you can have more than one talk group on a repeater slot. Well, how do I know if that talk group is actually transmitting? So what you do is you have a receive group, and you can put multiple talk groups in your receive group. So that when the repeater is transmitting, if it says, I have these 5 talk groups on the repeater, you can put those 5 talk groups in the receive group, and it doesn't matter which one is transmitting, it'll key up your radio, and you can tell if somebody's transmitting. Oh, that's why I can't transmit, because somebody's talking on the repeater. So the receive group works differently than the talk group. Now, why is it set up like this? Anybody want to take a guess? It's a commercial protocol. The way it needs to work for commercial users. This is why none of this makes sense to us. It's because it wasn't for us. Accept it. And we'll move on. Okay. So let's talk about vendor CPS differences. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is for the quote that's on the screen there, which is all too common. Hey, I just saw this review on amateurradio.com about this brand new fantastic DMR radio that came out. And I know it just released yesterday, and I just got it in the mail today, but do you have a code plug for it? No. It just came out. Right? So let's talk about this, because this is, as you can tell by the title of this slide, a matter of some consternation for me. This is going to come off sounding like a little bit of a rant, which it is, but it's one for discussion, and it's going to be healthy. So let's talk about this. First of all, why are we having a separate Chinese radio class? Because Chinese radios are typically is the key word there, typically more affordable than Motorola's. Are Motorola radios better radios? Yes. No one's arguing that. Okay? It's just that many of the Chinese radios are a much more affordable on-ramp. Okay? So the less expensive to purchase, and typically the CPS comes free. Now, as we know, for anything that comes free, there's always going to be a string attached. There's always going to be a gotcha. Right? We don't live in a perfect world. Did they finally change it? Wow. Motorola CPS is now free. Interesting. That changes the game a little bit. Maybe this class will be smaller next year. All right. Now, typically, each Chinese radio, and more often than not, each model within a certain manufacturer, comes with its own CPS, which will not work with other radios or other models. Welcome to CPS sprawl. This is where it starts getting ranty. Okay? Each CPS will have its own quirks. Okay? Terms will differ. Oh, it's not a talk group, it's a transmit contact. Why? Who knows? Since they decided to change the terminology in the CPS. Why? Because they could. Things that should be pull-down menus will be buttons for some reason. Talking to you, Anytone. Settings will be in different places. Because why standardize? That would be silly. Okay? Now, here's the one that gets kind of ranty. Just because it's the newest model doesn't mean it's better than what came before. We, as tech people, tend to get into this mindset that newer is always better. Anybody who believes this hasn't bought a car lately. Okay? So what am I trying to get at here? Okay? Yeah. Put some thought into buying your radio. Now, what do you think the most important aspect of buying your radio is, in my opinion? Anybody want to hazard a guess in the room? People that have been around me. Right? The programming experience. What is the easiest way to get up and running with a DMR radio when you're just getting started out? The sample code plugs. We have them. Other amateur radio groups have them. So the other side of that coin is that John came up and said, you don't support my radio. Right, we don't. So what does that mean? Buy a supported radio. There's a concept. Go to the club that you're going to be on, that the radio station want to do, see what code plugs are available, right? And use that list of available code plugs to guide your purchase decision. Now, I know this takes away some of your perceived freedom in purchasing and deciding on a radio, right? But you have the right, as an American, to purchase a radio that is going to cause you pain. And if that is what you want, by all means, purchase a radio and experience the pain. But if you want an easier road off the ground, there's a better way. MD380s are now under $100, and they will get you on the air. You do not have to buy a $300 Anytone unless you want to. Okay? There are better ways, right? And that last line is up there because that is the thing that gets most of us. It's like, oh, it's the newest, greatest, latest, and greatest, right? I have to have it. No, you don't. You do not. It's a trap, as I said in Star Wars. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these CPSs and see just how goofy we can get, shall we? All right. So what I want to start with, let's see. Let's start with the old good MD380, 390, because this is where I started. Now, the reason why I'm starting here is the MD380, MD390, and the CS700 were essentially the same radio. Okay, this is back when I started, back in the day. The CPS looks functionally identical. Now, could you take a code plug from the CS700 and open it in the MD380 CPS? No. Of course not. But they were functionally the same. So, if we go through here and take a look, we have our scan list, our zone information, receive groups, digital contacts, emergency system, channels. Where are the channels? Oh yeah, down here, channel information. Here we go. There's a channel, right? So all the things are down here on the left side, and if you don't know what you're doing, things won't happen. So if we'll talk about radio IDs, but the radio ID was up here in the general settings, right? Your digital contacts was your talk groups. This is always where you'd put your radio IDs that you wanted to do it here, which would populate things weirdly. Your receive groups were here. Light just went off in the hallway. That was weird. Here's your receive groups. Then when you went to your channel, you put in your bandwidth, your received frequency and transmit frequencies here, your scan list. And then over here, you would have your contact name, not talk group, contact name, terminologies. Not your receive group, but your group list, right? And then your color code, your repeater slot, not time slot, repeater slot, right? Now, the funny thing here is that even though there's a difference between, if you go to your digital contacts, right, there's group call and there's also private call, which is what you use for your talk groups, right? The talk groups would populate in the contact name because technically you can do a point-to-point over a repeater, which we don't support in amateur radio. But if you had like 100,000 contacts in there, they would all populate there and you would have to go through the whole list to find it. It was, yeah. Pain in the booty. Okay? So this is where we started. Now, Connect Systems came out with their CS750, CS800. All right. This looks more closely towards, in the direction of the Motorola stuff, right? It's not Motorola stuff, but it's more along that line. So you have your settings here. password lock, all this kind of stuff, right? The menus and things are up here. So here's our under conventional. Here's our channel, which I split conveniently between analog and digital. DMR services, our contacts here. Our contact list there. Now the funny thing here is, okay, where do I put in my radio ID? Oh, there it is right there. There's your radio ID, which is still kind of in your general settings area, right? You have your receive groups. You have your contact list, right? I was there just a minute ago. Here's our contact list. And then in your channel, you have this kind of split view. So you have your common settings at the top, you have your color code and your slot, right? Which they conveniently do repeater / time slot, so they got both covered there. On your receive side, you have your receive group list. There's RX for receive, hallelujah. And then on the transmit side, they have your transmit contact, not talk group, transmit contact, okay? So there, and then of course your frequencies here. So this is the Connect System CS750, CS800, okay? Then we have Anytone. Because Anytone wanted to be a little fancy, right? Did we have a question from Zoom? No? Okay. All right. So they start off with just like the big list, because apparently when you're doing software in most of the the amateur radio analog stuff, it starts out with this big list, right? So let's just start out with a big list. These are all the channels. So under there's common settings, which at the top you have your channels, your zone, your scan lists, and then under digital is where they have the talk group and the receive group. Okay. They split out their contact list. If you just want to have contacts in here for radio IDs, they split that out. Hallelujah. So that doesn't populate your transmit list or whatnot. Thank goodness for that. Now the funny thing is, like you're looking here, it's like, where do I put my radio ID? Now they decided to be fancy and put that under digital down here, but it's a list, which means for some reason you can put more than radio ID in your radio, more than one radio ID in your radio, because if you want to impersonate somebody. Right? It's the Anytone Twitter blue checkbox. Satire. But that you can do that in here if you really wanted to. I question the usability of this unless you're doing radio testing or something, but again, not all these radios are 100% geared towards amateurs, even though this is the more amateur-focused one, right? Now, where this gets fun in this channel is, I talked about, and again, looking at you, Anytone. So if you want to put in your talk group, in the Anytone software, it's called the contact. And there's this button here where there should be a drop down. And when you click the button, it brings up a grid. And all of your talk groups will be listed here in the grid. And then you double click the one you want and it populates the button. Look, everything else is a drop down. Everything else is a drop down. But the contact thing is a button. Why? Everyone has their own quirks, right? Now, if you think this is silly, go over to one of my other favorite ones. I wasn't going to bring this up, but somebody actually brought this radio in, so I have to bring it up. And again, this is sometimes done with love, but sometimes not. This is the Terra radio. Now, the fun thing about the Terra radio is one of the only ones where you cannot create a blank template from scratch. It's grayed out. You actually have to read from a radio, and if you want one that's blank, you have to clear everything out manually, because that's convenient. Okay? There's you have your radio information here. Your channel information is in a grid, right? Which, by the way, when you maximize it within the window, doesn't maximize the window. Just gives you gray space, right? You have your DMR settings, which is where it's not a radio ID, it's a local address. Yes, Or my favorite oxymoron, proprietary standard. Yes. You have your contacts in your talk groups. You have your contact sheet, which is like the Anytones. You can put your radio IDs in here separately, thank goodness. Your receive group list. Now, when I started out with this radio, they only allowed you to have like 10 receive groups because they couldn't understand why you'd want more than that, and I had to explain that to them. Okay? And then you have, on your channel, you open it, you have to go into the channel, pop this little more thing, and then it bumps up this. And then you can put in your information here. So your channel name, the frequency, encryption. We don't do encryption. So transmit, admit, Here's your receive group list, your color code, your slot. And then down here you have your contact. Okay. So which is a drop down, like every other CPS except for the Anytone. So it has that going for it, which is nice. So the point here being is that you have to know your software and the quirks of your software. Because if someone's programming with a different CPS or a different radio, they may or may not be able to tell you where that is in your software. So you have to know your software. Everything's different. Okay. This is the state of Chinese radios today. Part of this, I think, really comes from these companies that are well-meaning, but are trying to differentiate themselves in the market. And a lot of these differentiations are arbitrary. They're trying to be fancy instead of trying to be simple. No. Or as I like to say, never let an engineer design an interface. There's a reason why designers get paid what they do. Questions at this point or comments? Clarifications? Willem.
Is there a way that you can start with not for
Yes, to an extent. So remember this call sign, N0 GSG. If you go to Google and put in N0 GSG utility, what you end up with is this. You want the contact manager, the N0 GSG contact manager. Oh, that's the PDF. There we go. Now, there are some limitations to the software. It does not support every Chinese radio. I should go without saying. But it does support a lot of them. Okay? And it's all listed on the site. Connect systems, the 380, 390, MD 2017, 9600, the Anytones. Okay? So what this allows you to do, and the easiest way to do this, if you just want to be able to translate one to another, you create a blank code plug in your CPS of the supported radio. You open the code plug. Let me find my cursor here. You open the code plug in the software. And then you do what's called a structural import from the other supported CPS, the other code plug. And it basically does the translation. And then you save it, and now you've got the structure of your receive groups, talk groups, channels, zones, scan lists, from the one code plug to the other. Now again, it doesn't support all radios. Again, do your research before you buy. Right? Yes?
So what is this thing called Chirp? Similar to that.
Chirp I have not gotten into, but Chirp is a radio programmer that's supposed to support multiple radios. I have not gotten into Chirp yet. So that much I have to admit, I can't give much information on. So what this will, again, if you've got one, I use this for my own CPS because I support a lot of different code plugs. I'm in the process now trying to make one clean code plug that I can then translate to others. And every time I think I've got it right, I find something else wrong and I have to go back and start. I'm in the process of doing that now, but this will save you some time, right? If somebody has, it's like I don't have an Anytone code plug, but I have an MD380 code plug that is exactly what you're looking for, you can get that and use this to translate it and make it work. Okay. I have donated to this guy. There's a donate site here. I've given my level 3 donation to this guy because I use this utility a lot. But it is an external utility. It is third party. It is not supported by the actual radio programmers itself. This guy just went out of the goodness of his heart and created this. Right. So if you do use it, I do recommend that you do contribute to him as trying to keep him in the business of keeping this thing going. Okay. So know your CPS. Do your research before you buy. And if you want my opinion, I'm happy to give it. I will not go out and champion one particular radio over another because each one has its pros and cons. You tell me what you're looking for, and I'll recommend you something in that direction. Okay? Other questions before we move on? All right, let's dig in. So this will be a little bit of review because we've gone over some of this, but we wanted to touch on each one of these points and give it a little bit more time. This is an actual conversation I had when I worked at the call center at AOL in tech support. I had a lady calling up, couldn't figure out how to get her AOL software running. Turns out she didn't have a computer. I actually had to make the statement, yes, you need a computer to run computer software. And her next thing was, well, I'm going to sue. Why are you going to sue? Well, it says right here in this desk, I need this desk and a modem and I can get on AOL. Doesn't say anything about a computer. I sent her to our legal department and went on with my day. All right. What do you need? You need a radio. Now, in case it is not obliviously, very, very obvious, you do need a DMR radio. Right? Because analog radios and DMR radios are two different things. DMR radios will do analog, not the other way around. Okay? Now, there is a specification called a Tier 2 radio. Don't get overly concerned about this. There are some radios on the market which are Tier 1 radios which do voice on one time slot and data on the other, which will not do double voice. They're not typical in the amateur radio circles, but you do see them from time to time. You want one that has 2 voice channels. Okay? There are also some radios on that say Tier 1 and Tier 2 compatible. Run away from those because what they're doing, what we discovered, is that when they transmit on time slot 1, they're actually transmitting on time slot 1 and 2 at the same time, and they're causing interference. You don't see a lot of that anymore, but again, in the early days when things were getting up and companies were trying to cut corners and get into the market, you saw a lot of this. We have some of those up on our website that we've identified that they say, oh, we'll fix it in firmware. Never got fixed. So thankfully, we're a little bit past that now. Again, stick with the radios that we have co-plugs for. It'll be okay. Right? You will need a programming cable, in case it wasn't obvious. There are some amateur radio DMR radios that you can do front panel programming. I have actually met people in the community who are avid front panel programming enthusiasts. Those people are weird. They're also, I think they're sadists or masochists, one of the two, not quite sure. But front panel programming on DMR radios is a pain, in my honest opinion. Make sure it comes with a cable. Most of them come with the cable. Out of the gate. Do you have a question, John? No. Okay. You will need the programming software. All right? It should come as no surprise to anybody who has used an electronic device in the past 10 years that programming software gets updated and product electronic firmware gets updated. Right? Some of these updates are good. Some of these updates are silly. Some of them are for things you will never use, but it's out there, so be aware of it. And in some very rare cases, in order to use the latest CPS, you have to be running the latest firmware. Be aware of that. Okay? But you do need a radio. And to program it, it's easier to use the software, and in order to get the code plug from the computer to the radio, you'll need the cable. Right? I have not yet seen, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, a radio that allows you to upload the code plug via Bluetooth. I haven't seen that yet. It'll probably come. Somebody will probably put it on the market, and it'll probably suck. Motorola's do. See? That's why Motorola's are better. Not cheaper, but better. All right. Yeah, you will need a Windows computer. If you're really super tech savvy and even more of a masochist than me, you'll need at least Windows running in a VM. I have done it. I don't do it anymore. Ask me why after I've had a couple of beers. Because I have not seen a CPS today that runs on Linux natively. You'll need wine. If you know what that is. If you don't go there. Just use Win. Just, yeah.
Run the risk of bricking your
Run Windows natively, just do it. If you have to go down to Micro Center and buy a cheap old $300 laptop, do it. That laptop's cheaper than a radio. Let that sink in. Okay. Next thing you'll need is a radio ID. Now, being a digital thing, most digital things have some kind of identification, especially if you're going to be on a network. DMR radios are on a repeater network, or you're on a repeater that has multiple radios. And one of the things it uses in its operation is the ID of the radio. Now, it should also come as no surprise that within a specific system, whether it be a single repeater, or the RMHAM repeater network, or the Brandmeister network, within that network system, it works best when every radio has a unique ID. So how do we go about getting a unique ID to make sure we're not stepping on other people's toes? Well, there's an organization called, the website is radioid.net, that has this covered. So all you have to do is go to radioid.net. They will ask you to send a soft copy of your radio license to make sure they're not just sending it off to some guy, right? Upload that, give your information and email address, and within 24 hours at most, I've seen, they do this pretty quick. They'll shoot you back and assign your radio ID. Super simple. But you will want that. Now, you can do this ahead of time before you get your radio, right? They're not going to check to make sure you have a radio first, right? So you can do this ahead of time and get that taken care of even before you get your radio. Okay? Now, when you want to talk to a repeater, obviously you're going to need some information about that repeater. And if you were paying attention, you know what information that is, right? You need the frequency pair. You need the color code. You need the talk group that you want to talk on, that repeater is set up to support, and what time slot or repeater slot that talk group is on. Questions? This is our base, our fundamental. Thoughts, queries, questions? All right. Let's do this. I've always said that in order to really have freedom of your radio, to have control over your radio, and to have the best experience in the DMR world, you need to be able to program your own radio. Okay? Very early, even in the early days, I talked about the early days like it was like, a long time ago. It's like 5 years ago, not very long ago. It was very common. People would, can you create a code plug for me? No, come to one of our classes. Learn to program your own radio. It's not that hard. And once you have this done, you have full freedom. You don't have to wait for somebody else to turn around a code plug just because you want to add a repeater to your radio. All right? It's the best way to work. All right. So let's talk about the flow. The first thing you want to do anytime you reinstall your CPS or get started in your CPS is to put your radio ID in the CPS. All right, put it in there. Okay? Now, like some of the radios, like the Terra radio, you have to read from your radio first before the CPS will allow you to do anything. Okay? Read that out so you can get to this, get that radio ID in there, and save. Now, we talk about code plugs. What is a code plug? At the end of the day, what is a code plug? It's a file. What's in that file? All the parameters of the radio. Not just the channels, but also your settings. And guess what one of those settings is? Your radio ID. It's in the file. Which means you could have some code plugs with a different radio ID in it than others. Right? So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to open up this old CPS and load it to my radio. You open that up, what's the first thing you should check? Make sure your radio ID is correct. Somebody sends you a code plug. You open it up, what's the first thing you should do? Change the radio ID so you're not transmitting as them, right? Always know in your particular CPS where your radio ID is. And it's never a bad idea. The first thing you open it up to go and double check that that radio ID is correct. Willem.
For all my radios?
Yes, star. Now, I said before that the systems work best when all the radios on the system have different radio IDs. Okay? So you can use the same radio ID in multiple radios. You just don't want those radios turned on at the same time and accessed in the same system. Shenanigans will happen. Unpredictable shenanigans will happen, right? So I say if you have a radio in your car and you have an HT, put the same radio ID in. When you're in your car, turn your HT off, turn your mobile on, motor on and on. When you get to the site, turn your mobile off, turn your HT on, off and off you go, perfectly fine. So you don't need multiple IDs from radioid.net in order to function with multiple radios.
Is it worse on a linked network than it is on a single repeater?
It's about the same, but anytime you go into a network, it's always going to be weirder. Right? But like I said, just don't have the radios on at the same time. If for some reason you're doing some kind of testing and you need to have two radios on the same system at the same time, you can ask Radio ID for a second ID so you don't cause problems. Generally speaking, though, you only need the one. Okay? First thing you do, put your radio ID in. Okay? Now, again, I pulled this section from another presentation. Now, this is the stuff you need. We already talked about that. Frequencies, color code, time slot, and talk group. Now, oddly enough, this is not the order that you will put this into the radio, right? You noticed on most of these on the radios that there was these pull-down lists or button grid when you start creating the channel, right? Those pull-down menus have to be populated. So you have to put those things in first. So the things you'll put in first are the talk groups. So you populate your talk group list first. And you populate the talk groups first because you have to have the talk groups populated before you can then populate the receive groups. Because the receive groups are populated out of the talk group list. Once you have your talk groups and your receive groups populated, then you can go to the channel, and as part of your channel spec, choose your talk groups and your receive groups from the list. Then, once you've created your channels, you can add your channels to a zone, right? Now, why do we have zones? Right? I think we'll go into that actually in the long list, so I'll save that conversation for a second. So the order that you do this in matters. I talked earlier on about pulling my hair out because I did things in the wrong order. This is what I learned early on. Do your talk groups first. Because there's nothing more frustrating than going to a channel. It's like, where's that talk group? And you're like, oh, forgot to put the talk group in. Close the channel, go to the talk groups, add those talk groups. Just do that first. All right.
Mike?
Yes.
We have a question from chat.
Okay.
What radio IDs are allowed for which services? I have an old ID starting with a 1, but I also got a newer one that begins with a 3, sort of recently.
Yeah, so if you got these radio IDs from radioid.net, it doesn't matter. Use the same IDs for all services. Because it was issued by radioid.net, you can be pretty much guaranteed as much as humanly possible that it'll be unique on all the different radio networks. So it does not matter. Thank goodness. All right, so here's some sample channels. You have a sample channel from the beginning of the presentation as well, so we'll leave this up to take a look at while I answer a question from Willem.
My CPS programming doesn't have a button that says talk groups.
Yeah, it probably has a pull-down menu.
No, it has something called contacts.
Yeah, we went over them and went through the different things, right? It'll call different things in different CPSs. Know your CPS. Sometimes it'll be called contact. Sometimes it'll be called transmit contact. You just have to know for your CPS where it is. If you need some help figuring that out, let me know. I'll come over and look over your shoulder and show you where that's supposed to be. All right, so the channel list that you have here, the channel on the left is just a label. Should come as no surprise that different CPSs have different limits on how long that channel name can be. I have worked with a CPS in my early days where that could only be 8 characters long. And trying to do the various different RMHAM repeaters with only 8 characters was a bit of a challenge, shall we say. You have your color codes, your time slots, your receive frequency, your transmit frequencies, and your talk groups. And you can see right off the bat the top 2 for our SQA. And are we going to change the name of SQA at some point on our website? Okay. You can see that we've got the same frequency pair, exact same frequency pair, exact same color code, 2 channels, 2 slots. So somebody can be talking on 2 people can be talking on Rocky Mountain back and forth at the same time. 2 people are talking on Central at the same time. And those 2 conversations will never meet, but they can happen at the same time on the same repeater with the same color code, same repeater pair. Okay? Now, I put up a DMR mark example just because we don't have a lot of DMR mark in Denver much anymore, but I put it up there as a perfect example of what I was talking about before, where you can have multiple talk groups on the same repeater slot. So you can see Mountain and Local are on the same repeater slot. Worldwide English, and North America are on the same repeater slot. So if somebody was talking on this repeater on Mountain, somebody tried to key up on Local, they wouldn't be able to key up because that repeater slot would be busy on the Mountain talk group. But the funny thing is that you keep trying, you can get in, and you can start talking on Local. The other guy on Mountain tries to reply back on Mountain, he'll get a busy signal because Local took over. This is why, for the most part, we try to keep our repeaters, with some exceptions, one talk group one talk group per time slot. There are we do have some exceptions to that by request. Most of those are in the New Mexico area and 4 Corners. But generally speaking, we try to keep it as minimal as possible for that very reason. Not busy repeaters. Yeah. So what is a talk group? We're going to get down and do a deep dive into some of these. It's kind of like an access control level beyond the color code, beyond the time slot, right? For repeaters and talk groups, you must know what talk group to be on. Otherwise, it may not get repeated. It may not get transferred out, depending on how they have it set up. Talk groups are assigned to a repeater slot. You need to know which one it's on. More than one talk group could be assigned, but only one could be talking at a given time on a given repeater slot. This is where a lot of the conversation, like I said, in today's world is about. It's like you've got a Brandmeister. Brandmeister's all about, I want a talk group. I want my own talk group. Yeah. We have talk groups in Brandmeister that are connected via a translator to our RMHAM talk groups on our repeater network for North, Central, and South. Okay? Because we don't want people coming in from Brandmeister tying up the entire freaking network. That would be, I think, what's the term we use for a bad thing, I think, is what we'd call that. All right. So we talk about the contact list. The contact list is where you put your talk groups, oddly enough. Okay? You also use this for private calls. What are private calls? So we have to have this conversation now. So for those radios, the vast majority of those radios in amateur radio that have a display, right? When you transmit from your radio to the system, your identifier is transmitted as your radio ID. Okay? Your name and your call sign do not get transmitted. Right? Just your radio ID. Because that's part of the DMR spec, right? What this means is that you have to actually identify audibly when you're on an amateur radio network with a DMR radio, just like you would with analog, right? Because a radio ID is not your call sign. And for FCC purposes, you have to identify with your call sign, right? Not the same.
Call sign comes up when that.
Yes, and here's why. If and only if the radio that is receiving the signal has an entry in their contact list that matches your name and call sign to the radio ID, then your name and your call sign will show up instead of the radio ID. If it's not in there, all that shows up is your radio ID. Doesn't matter.
But I read on the internet that you can do that.
Yeah, that's wrong. I think one of the things about people believing everything they see on the internet is why the world is the way it is today. So it's not true. Still remains not to be true to this day. You do not transmit anything over the digital side of the DMR except for your radio ID, and a radio ID is not enough to satisfy FCC rules. Sorry, right? But what this means is that if you want to, you can put those radio IDs in your radio so that you can see, the ID of the person that's coming in. But you have to do that yourself. And it's a lot easier to do this on some radios than others. Okay? The Terra and the Anytones are much easier to do this on, which is fantastic, which is some of the upsell for those that actually are worthwhile. Okay? Question?
So, private calls, are you telling me I can do private calls?
So that was the next thing that we needed to go over. In the DMR spec, and again, remember this is the commercial radio protocol, right? In the DMR spec, you can, technically with the DMR radio over repeater, transmit to a private call to an individual radio ID instead of a talk group. If you do this, and the person with that radio ID is on that time slot, on the repeater slot, monitoring, their speaker will open and they will hear the call, and other people that are listening will not. Okay? It's a part of the DMR spec. This is highly frowned upon and discouraged in amateur radio because amateur radio, you're not supposed to obfuscate your transmission. And if you are transmitting to an individual radio ID, you are obfuscating your transmission to every other ham that's on the network. Also, especially if you try to do this on something like Rocky Mountain Talk Group, you are tying up the entire Rocky Mountain Talk Group and the entire system,
37 repeaters.
37 repeaters, to have a private conversation with one individual.
Not on 37 repeaters.
Right.
On maybe one repeater.
On one
or two.
repeater. So, this is not allowed in RMHAM. We put this on the website, the private calls are not allowed.
What happens when you do it?
I don't actually know what happens. when
You get bonked.
You get bonked.
Yeah, if you're talking on a private call and somebody else tries to get on the repeater elsewhere, they're going to get bonked and they're not going to know why.
Right.
That's why we don't want it.
Yeah, we don't want it. I believe most of the repeater networks that are on, that are traditional repeater networks, this is frowned upon. Brandmeister's a special duck because Brandmeister works in a different way. We can discuss that after the main presentation. But generally speaking, avoid private calls in amateur radio. Okay, put them in your contact list for ID. Fantastic. They really should serve no other purpose.
Right.
Yeah, after this slide. So also in your contact list is talk groups. Again, some radios have broken these out, but traditionally they're in the same place. And there's this thing called all call. All call does exactly what it sounds like. If you transmit an all call, every radio that hears it will key up whether they have it programmed or not. Okay? So we talked about radios with displays will show the radio ID of the person that's transmitting. If it's in your local radio, has to be in your local radio. This is not something that is transmitted. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is what that looks like. In the Connect systems, most of them look like it's just a list.
It's a pain in the butt to maintain it too. So I
Yes.
choose to not have any calls in my contact
Right.
list. It's not required.
If this is something that you like to do, where you like to have a lot of radio IDs in your radio, but you don't want to manage it, this is where I start pushing you towards Terra and Anytime.
It changes constantly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Questions on this? Yes, definitely can be limited. Questions? All right, in the local here, we're going to go ahead and take a break because we've been going for an hour. Let's take, how long? 10
minutes.
10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Okay.
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
From chat, John Wells asked, what does bonked mean?
Your transmission will be halted and the other transmission allowed to go through.
And you'll hear a nasty beep on your radio when you push to talk.
Yeah. Or from hell. All right, so local guys, 10 minutes. Take a break, relax, get some drinks. If you need to go to the restroom, let us know. But we're going to take a 10-minute break. Yes, welcome back. Some interesting commentary on the downside. There was one commentary about the Terra radios, which kind of they said was HRO's brand model, which is kind of true. It was made by PowerWorks, but everybody was buying Anytones because the Anytones were very popular. And it's no surprise that you can now buy an Anytone radio at HRO. What is the ones you can buy there? The Anytones and the Terras. And the Anytones have become more popular for the Terras, and then now that you've seen the software, you're probably going to understand why. Nothing against the radio, it's a solid radio. CPS is a little wonky, as we'll get into that when we get into the practical side of this. Okay. There was also things like, well, you know, if I need to talk on a repeater and I don't know what talk group to go on, can I just put in all call and that'll work? It'll work once, and it'll annoy everybody, and they will ask you not to do that again. So don't do that. If the repeater operator is smart enough, they will find a way to block that. And it won't work because, again, it does things that it's not supposed to do, and it will make people very cranky. All right, do we have any other questions come over the chat in the interim that we need to check? Very good. No. That's a whole other thing. Okay. So there is, well, I'm just going to hit this very briefly because it came up. So there is a version of APRS that's called DMR APRS that functions over DMR channels to a kind of like a broker server that sends the information to the APRS system. We want to say up front that this is not something that we want on the RMHAM DMR network, right? We don't have a way of pushing it across. So don't do it, it causes interference. There is a Brandmeister channel set aside for this purpose. So if you have a hotspot in your car or find a Brandmeister repeater in your area to do this on, do not do this on the RMHAM network, please. You'll get a call, you will get what do they call that? A stern talking to, at least up front. Willem? So the way that this works, in the way that it's set up for DMR APRS, is that it sends an APRS text message type packet thing. Okay, and inside that message, it includes your call sign and your GPS coordinates and that kind of thing. So it does have identifying information in it, and that's how they get around the legality of and identification things. Use at your own risk. Don't do it on the RMHAM network. It won't do anything. It goes nowhere, so it's pointless. End of that particular discussion. That's all we need to say.
Part of the discussion about the Anytone radios, is it the Anytones that have the nice, or the, which has the nicest CPS, did you say?
None of them. They all have their quirks. The Anytone is the far more complicated because it has the most features. So I have not seen a Chinese radio CPS that I would call elegant or the best, because they all have their quirks. They all fall short in one way or another. You don't even have to say Chinese. All CPS. Right. I will, the ones that I find the most frustrating, the Terra and the Connect System CS580. Okay. Yes. Have you tried the RT system software for me? No, I have not. I've got it. Right. Which is great, but it feels like that I'm paying money for something that I can get for free. So that's why I haven't done it. Yeah, but $25 is infinitely more expensive than zero. So there's that. Okay, but there is RT systems, the software for it if you want to spend the money. All right, moving on from contact lists, we have receive groups. We talked about receive groups before. Receive groups is basically just a bunch of talk groups that works in the receive side of the channel, right? You put your talk groups in the receive group, which is why you have to do your talk groups first. Obviously, more than talk groups can be put in because that's part of the spec. Remember the doctrine that this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's because it wasn't built for you. It's built for commercial users. There was also some conversation on site here over the interim about, well, you know what? I never put a talk group or a receive group in and my radio works. Why is that? Well, it's because more modern radios like the Anytones have a built-in feature that automatically puts whatever talk group you have set on the channel into the receive group in memory, so it'll still function. You also have features on those radios, which in the, there was an old hacked firmware for the CS380s called it promiscuous mode. In the Anytones, it's called digital monitor. And what that means, you turn digital monitor on, and that means any talk group that comes through on that frequency pair, color code, and talk group, or time slot, will open the speaker regardless of whether it's in the radio or not. Yes, it'll display what talk group it is and what radio ID is transmitting. And I believe the Anytones actually has the ability to monitor both time slots at the same time. You can't transmit on both of them, but you can monitor both at the same time. So in modern, updated amateur radio focused radios like the Anytone, the receive group isn't as important, but it is still part of the spec. So be aware of that. All right. This is what a receive group typically looks like. It's basically name your group and put over the talk groups you want from one side to the other to populate it, and off you go. Not terribly difficult. All right. Now that you have your talk groups and receive groups channels populated, you can actually create your channel. So here you can see, and I have to go up here to look at that. So the color code at the top, and you also, and this one is the Connect System CS750-800. You choose your time slot at the top because it's the same for, it's universal for the channel. On the left side, you have your receive side, so you choose your receive frequency, which is the transmit frequency of the repeater. Repeater transmit, radio receive, and your receive group. And then the transmit frequency of the radio, which is the receive frequency of the repeater. And there people can get that backwards. And then the transmit contact talk group for that side. Right? So those are the things you need for your channel. Frequency pair, color code, time slot, talk group. Right? Beat that into your head. And the receive group, which is defined by the talk group there. All right? We talked about the color code. It basically works as a CCDS tone or DCS tone. It is not a tone. Again, it's not a tone. It is part of the digital packet header that is part of the DMR protocol. It doesn't actually send out a tone. And it is a number. It's not a color because that's the way it is. Zero through 15. Repeater slots. We talked about that. The repeater can split into 2 time slots. You have to know which one you're on or you'll miss the bus. So this is an actual programmed channel. You can see color code 7, time slot 1. You can see the frequency pair. This is Rocky Mountain talk group and Rocky Mountain receive group. This is a properly created channel in the Connect System software. All right? Questions about channels to this point?
Channel is within.
Talk group is within a channel. Yeah. So a channel is frequency pair, color code, talk group, receive group.
Can't hear it unless you have it in your.
Or unless the radio supports a different method of doing it, such as automatically putting it in, or you have digital monitor on.
Plan on having it in.
Yeah. Best practice is to put it in the receive group. It's a good practice to be in.
Depends on what radio you have, and most radios don't do it.
Yeah. If you do it the other way and it doesn't work, try doing it the proper way and then trying again. You'll learn your radio really quick. Other questions? All right, so what we haven't talked about so far is zones. What is a zone? Now, remember, this is a commercial radio. And before I got my first DMR radio, I had never seen one of these turny knobs at the top to select your channel. It's always done with buttons. It's a turny knob. What's a turny knob? That's a channel selector knob. Oh, that's cool. Great. Some of the older radios, you were limited to 16 selections and it would stop. And then you had to go the other direction and it would stop, right? This is an anytone. It just goes on forever and ever, never, 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 never. I forget how many actual talk channels this supports on a single zone. But you have 60 bajillion channels in your radio. How did you get those channels assigned to the channel selector knob? You do that with a zone. Okay? So a zone is, unsurprisingly, a selection of channels. Group of channels. You can only have one zone in use at a time, but of course you can have multiple zones pre-created in your code plug. Okay? The zone corresponds with the channel selection dial. On some radios, those selections are specific. So if you have one where it stops at 16 and you put in 8 channels, the first channel will be on the 1 selector, the second channel will be the number 2 selector. When you get to 9, it'll go beep, annoyingly. Sorry about that, audio. And it'll say no channel or something like that, and you'll be going, what is that? It's because you haven't assigned a channel to that particular slot. On the anytones, if you only have 8 channels, and you get to channel 8 and you ticket one more, it just goes back to the first channel. Right? Much better user experience, in my opinion. Right? Radios can have numerous zones. Okay? And a channel can be a member of more than one zone. All right? So what does that? That means you can set these up. You can have a zone. And the way that we do this in the sample, as we do with most things in the sample, we do it geographically. So we have a north zone, a south zone, and a central zone. We've had to split the central zone into east and west for those radios that you can only put 16 channels in a zone. We've also split out the New Mexico channels into a separate zone because south has gotten too big. Okay? But these zones can have any channels in your code plug that you want. You can mix analog and digital. You can set up different zones for different purposes. If you're going to an event and you have certain zones certain channels that are going to be used for the event, throw all the channels in a zone and be able to select between them, right? You can do this all up front. And then, depending on the radio, you'll have a way. This one you have the central little thing that goes up button, down button, that allow you to switch between your zones very quickly. And then once that zone is selected, the channels that are in that zone are then on your little selector dial, and you select the channel that you want, and then you transmit. Okay? For me, that was a new concept in radios, right? My analog radios, my first analog amateur radio radios didn't work that way. So that's why that is. So you create your channels, you assign the channels to zones. Once you have all this done in your code plug, you save it, you upload the code plug to your radio. You can only have one code plug in there at a time, right? And then when you turn it on, that code plug is in there, you load the zone that you want, and off you go. Okay? Questions? Right, yeah. Unless the channel has front panel programming that allows you to add stuff to zones, and then you have to go digging for it. But yeah, so if you have some of the radios, if you have a channel in your code plug, and you haven't signed it to a zone, it won't show up in your radio. The radio has no way of showing you a channel list unless it's specific, right? So be aware of that. Don't panic. Just go create another zone, put the channel in it, upload it, right?
Okay, so I have RM send E, squaw send.
Right. So RM Cent E is the central east zone. That's the zone. That's the collection of channels.
Okay,
And then
squaw central,
that's the squall repeater, central talk group.
so that's geographic.
Yeah, that's the way that we do our network. Yeah. We try to make it easy. Right?
Hey, Mike.
Yep.
Hey, for those in the room, we've got some microphones here that so we can get people on the Zoom, if we could start using those or repeat the questions.
So the question here was just basically, was going through the sample code plug and was figuring out what it was. So one of our zones is RMHAM Central East, or as in this radio, because it doesn't display the whole thing, is RMHAM Central E. And then he has squall. Because it goes east and west, because the central basically splits between east and west if you look at it as a.
Why do you split it?
Because some radios don't allow more than 16 channels, and central has more than 16 channels in it.
So how do I decide which one to be on?
Figure out where the repeater is, either east or west of Denver, and use the right zone.
What's the demarcation line?
We'll have to look at it here in a minute. Figure that out in your radio. Spend some time in the CPS. But that's we just had to do that because, again, some radios, the older radios typically, don't allow more than 16 channels. And if like for SQUA has 2 channels, right? Central and Rocky Mountain. That takes up 2. We're basically limited to 8 repeaters. There's more than 8 central repeaters. So we had to split it into 2 zones for those radios that don't support more than 16 channels. The joys of CPS management. Other questions? So here's some stuff and things before we get into the live portion of the workshop. The RMHAM website, there is an interactive DMR repeater map, which I will show you here in a moment. The Radio ID website, again, you can download the presentation. This will all be in there. The DMR Mark website, the various Brandmaster websites, and my email, which is k0nga@arrl.net, if you want to email me directly. You do not ask me to program your radio, you ask me how to program your radio. It's the purpose of this class. All right. Let's take a look at the repeater map, why don't we? So this is, if you go to that bit.ly link, this is the map that shows up. On the left side here, we have the repeaters again broken out geographically into different layers, and you can uncheck the layers. So if you wanted to focus in on one, let's focus in on north. There's all the north repeaters. If we go to central, you can see all the central repeaters, and they kind of go east-west. So if you take the Denver repeaters and go east, that's one zone, and then anything west of the Denver repeaters is in the west zone. We just split that up again because some of the repeaters, some of the radios don't allow you to add more than 16 channels into a zone. Okay. So that's central. We had north. We split up south a little bit. So here's south in Colorado.
Can you go back to central? I was counting the repeaters, and there wasn't 16 repeaters there. Why?
No, 8 repeaters, 16 channels, because every repeater will have 2 channels. In this particular bit, you'll have central on time slot 2, but you'll have Rocky Mountain on time slot 1. So that's every repeater has 2 channels at least, so that'd be 8 repeaters. So there are more than 8 repeaters. Yeah, more than 8. Unfortunately, it's just the way that plays out. South, we split into south, and then New Mexico, Four Corners, and New Mexico. That's all in south. You can see we go all the way down to Sandia Mountain in Albuquerque. We do have some VHF repeaters as well, which are currently in their own layer here. And we have a few which and there weren't enough for different ones. We added this to a system which is called odd configurations. So we have a repeater that's local and YO wide. Devil's Head is local and south. Fort Collins is local and north. Lyman B, which is a new one, is north and south. And then we have Lookout Mountain, which is central and a local. So those repeaters are special children, as I like to call it. If we turn on all the layers, you can see just how extensive the repeater network has become. So I created this map because I didn't really have a visual representation myself of where things were and how wide the network was and where the repeaters are geographically. So I use this as a guide for myself to say, if someone's somewhere, Where is their nearest repeater geographically? Just because it's near geographically doesn't guarantee you can get into it, because it might be on the other side of a mountain. Right? Your miles may vary. Void where prohibited. See store for details. So there's a link in the presentation. bit.ly/rmham-turbo.map. I use turbo because in the old days, I created this link back in the day when the turbo was still part of the thing. We moved away from it, but it's also, the link is on the DMR site information on the RMHAM website. I've lost count. How many have we added this year?
So the question is how many repeaters were added this year, and we pretty much can only do it in the summer. And this summer we added Montrose, which is called Water Dog. We added Lyman, and we added Burlington.
3 repeaters this summer.
That's 3 new ones this year. We're trying to get Lee Hill local back on the air, and everything keeps sliding. I mean, we're trying to get things done before the snow flies, and we're just about done. So we're working.
Yeah.
It's coming, but we've been building microwaves like madmen this year, so it pretty much pushed the network build out to only 3 this year.
All right. So if everybody can open their CPS, we're going to program this channel. Okay? I am going to do it 4 times because I'm a sadist. All right? I'm not that much of a sadist. There are certain things that I have learned to eschew. I purposely don't learn how to program because I know there are certain people that if they ever learned that I programmed, they would always be coming to me to help them do stuff. And it's just like, I don't have enough time. So I've learned the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And if you don't want to get oiled, don't squeak. Right? In that kind of a way. All right. So let's go in order here. So here is our, where is the other one? There it is. Our MD390. So the first thing I'm going to do in my MD390, go to general settings. And now for the sample, we always use RMHAM sample, and we use a radio ID of 12345. We do that because it's very easy to catch people who have uploaded the sample code plug without changing their radio ID. We can immediately call them out for it. In the last 2 years, I've switched to 12345 exclusively. Yep.
You know, one of the applications in your call sign is N0CLU.
Okay. That's the CS. This is the MD380, MD390, CS700 code plug. General setting, radio ID up there. Okay. Connect systems. We'll just go up here to setting. They conveniently put this as my radio, whatever, not this. I always will do this as RMHAM sample, just for consistency's sake. Radio ID 12345. Okay. Again, for the 75800 CPS, that is up in the general settings setting. Okay. For the Anytone, where's my Anytone software? You have to go down under digital to radio ID list. And for this entry, we'll put the radio ID as 12345. And I'll put this as K0NGA mic. No, RMHAM sample. Like that. Okay. That's all we need in there.
Hold on a second here. Why is there a list?
Because Anytone, in their infinite wisdom, thought that it would be really cool for you to be able to put more than one in.
I'm having enough trouble to get one radio ID. Why
Yeah.
would I need 40?
Again, commercial radio protocol. I guess there are certain radios customers that wanted this feature. There it is. For the Terra, now this one again, because I couldn't create a new one from scratch, I'm opening an existing one. So I'm cheating. by necessity. Judge me. Why can't I close that? Close it. Can you tell that I don't like this software? Yes. Nope. Doesn't want to do it. Not my favorite software. Not my favorite software. Okay, so DMR services setting, local address, 12345. That's where that's put in. This would be whatever your radio ID is. All right. Questions about the radio ID?
Can I ask for a favor?
Sure.
Would it be possible to create a website that translates what the different CPSs calls the same thing? Because this is terribly confusing.
It is. The good news is that most end users only have to deal with one CPS. Only I am statistic enough to have to work with multiple ones. So once you learn yours, it's okay. All right. Questions about radio ID? Anything from the Zoom? Okay. Next thing we need to do. What is our order of chow? What's the first thing we needed to populate for before we can do channel? Talk groups. So what is our talk group? Our talk group for the day is 310801. Now, this talk group is a Brandmeister talk group. Anybody that not in a purple shirt or should be wearing their purple shirt know the significance of this talk group number. So now, here's something to keep in mind. So the comment from the audience was, it's a Colorado one. Where that comes from is that in the DMR world, there was a certain thing, especially with radio ID up front, to model the radio ID, repeater IDs around a telephone model or something that assigned each state or whatever a prefix. Number system for cellular. Colorado was 3108. Okay? Now, if you are in a world where people follow that convention, then yes. Does it have to be in Brandmeister? No. It's just a number in Brandmeister. The only thing that gives it any significance is anybody's decision to adhere to the standard. You can put in 31089997 and call it Florida, and that's allowed. Okay?
You put in for the talk group.
I don't know. I've seen
Is it a
7.
32-bit integer?
8 digits. So, but typically what you'll see, what I've seen in DMR Mark and Brandmeister, again, this is typical. It's not a requirement or a limitation. 6 digits for repeaters, 7 digits for talk groups. They do go beyond that. My hotspot is like 10. For whatever it is. Long story. But this is the talk group that we're going to do. And we're going to call this talk group, and I only gave a name here, but we're going to call it is Brandmeister or BM Central. That's what we're going to label it. Because the RMHAM Central talk group on the Brandmeister network. So the thing about Brandmeister is still the wild, wild west. Just because something should be done a certain way doesn't mean that it will be. People don't necessarily follow the conventions. You can get on talk group 310811 and talk about Florida. It's just there as a label, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view. All right, so in the 380, where do we put in our talk groups? Where is it? Digital contacts, there it is, yay. So we're going to go in here, we're going to create a new contact. We're going to call this BM Central, like that. Now this is a group call. A private call is radio ID, all call is all call. And our call ID is going to be 310801. Okay? Just like that. There we go, okay. Call receive tone is, you can set up different receive tones. And this one, there's only one, where if you get a call from that talk group, it'll beep at you instead of just opening up. Some radios support multiple receive tones for those people that like to have a tone to pop in to let them know, you know, so they can differentiate talk groups from each other. But that's what that is. All right, 750, 800. We get off the general screen. Those are all the things.
So
Yeah.
when I added that, would it matter? What's the key? The name that I assign or the number? So if I've already used that number for something else, is that a problem?
So
If
only
the
the
call
number,
ID
only the number matters to the system. Okay? When you go to create your channel, it's not going to show you the call ID, it's going to show you the contact name. Okay?
with different names?
It's redundant, and I'm not sure whether it'll actually allow you to do that. We call this K0NGA and put in the same one. Let's see. Call ID already exists. Or as the Chinese English says, call ID is already existing. Chinglish. Okay, good, thank you. All right. So the call ID can only be in there once. So we go into the CPS for the 750-800. Here under DMR services, under contact. There it is. So we'll add in BM Central 310801. There we go. Make sure that's stuck. Yes, it did. Okay. For the any tone, we will go to contact/talk group, not the digital contact list, that's a different thing. Contact/talk group. And we'll double click on the second row because that's how you do it in the Anytone. BM Central 310801. Okay, that's in our list there. And then to show you in the Terra, it may already be in there. So contacts, talk groups, here's our list. Be very surprised if it's not in there. It's not. BM Mountain. Yeah. Okay, so it's not. I just want to make sure it wasn't already in there. We can hit add. Now, it was like, what did add do? What's going on? What's going on here? This is something weird that happens with you have to find the ID 1 here that it actually puts in there. So it just adds one with a default name called ID 1. So you have to go looking for it. BM Central. Oh, it disappeared. Where'd it go? Oh, because it's BM Central. Now it's up here. I have to go back up to it here. Like I said, not my favorite CPS. Group call 310801. Never let an engineer design an interface. Questions from the chat? Okay. So now our talk group is populated. Now we can go, again, in the proper way, we're going to go create our receive groups. May not be necessary, but we're going to do it the proper way. So back to our MD380. Here's our digital group list. We've got one by default. We're going to add one. We're going to call this, oddly enough, BM Central. And we have to take our available contact and add it to our contact member of the receive group. Okay. So the way this interface works is you have some navigation buttons at the bottom. So if I'll go back one, there's group 1, which is empty. Go to the next one, there's BM Central, which has BM Colorado in it. Actually, that should be BM Colorado. Let's have some fun. I misnamed that. Let's go back to our contact list. Change that to BM Central, which is what it should be. Did that change here? Oh, look, it did. Hallelujah for that, at least. So that's the MD380. Here, we're going to, in the 750-800, we'll go down to receive group, list, open up. Same kind of deal here. We're going to add one. Add is down here. The name is down here instead of at the top for some reason. And then we'll add our BM Central to the talk group. John, I'm hoping that this is giving you some appreciation of what I go through every time I have to add something to a cold plug. Every time a new repeater comes online. That's why I don't maintain. Yes. Any tone. We go to receive group list here. And we're going to create a receive group called BM Central. And again, we just select our contact and add it to the list. Okay. This is the Anytone is the only one I've seen where it actually has a list where it shows you the receive group and then shows you the members of the receive group in a list. That's nice. Terra, receive group list. There's a list of them over here, but you have to actually select the list to see who's in it. We're going to add. Thankfully, I put it at the bottom. Notice that this does not alphabetize like the talk group list does, because who needs consistency? All right. BM Central. We'll find our BM Central and add it to the list. Okay. And this is only populated because, again, I couldn't create a new code plug here. I had to start from an existing one because it doesn't allow you to do a blank one. Okay. So now we've got our talk group in. We've got our receive group in. Now we can go and actually create our channel. Pop back over here. We can go down here to our channel list. Channels information. Here's our channels. Okay. Again, we get a window here, and we need to add here. You can see it adds over here to the list, and then we're now on channel 2. Oddly enough, we're going to call this channel BM Central. Okay, because we do like consistency. All right. Now, this is where we start getting into our first fun point. DMR radios can do analog and digital. They can do narrow band and wideband. Okay? Because DMR is a commercial radio protocol, it will be by default digital, duh, and narrowband. I do not know of any wideband DMR repeaters. I don't think they exist. Concept does not apply in A. Only narrowband. So for a DMR channel, we got channel mode digital, bandwidth 2.5. If we're doing analog, you can do analog. You can do, you actually have to select analog for it to let you do 25 kilohertz. If you switch back to digital, it'll automatically switch you back to narrowband. Okay? The receive frequency is what frequency of the reader? Transmit. Very good. So our transmit frequency is 438.6. Okay. Great. Our transmit frequency is the receive frequency of the repeater. I don't see that here. Okay. So this is an amateur radio convention. As far as I know, it's maybe a commercial radio convention as well. The gap between the receive and transmit frequency on UHF is 5 megahertz. Okay. So we follow that convention. It's a commercial convention that we follow. And the minus means is that it's the transmit frequency is going to be, or the receive frequency of the repeater is going to be minus 5 megahertz on the transmit frequency here. So that'll be 433.6. Yeah. So 433.6 is going to be our transmit, which will go to the repeater's receive. Got to get those right or it's not going to work. I remember the first code plug I came up with a radio that is we don't talk about anymore. Thank goodness, may it rest in peace. Where I think half of the DMR frequencies I had in there, this was backwards. That was new. It was something I had to relearn. Okay, so now we've got our frequency in. Okay, Next thing on our list was the color code, right? So what's the color code that we needed? Color code 1. Conveniently enough, it's already on color code 1. You'll notice here it is up to 15, 0 to 15, but we're color code 1. Repeater slot or time slot is going to be 2. So here's repeater slot 2. There's only 2. And then we need to set the time slot and the talk group and the receive group. So for here, in the MD380-390, the talk group is set in the contact name. There's BM Central. And then the group list is the receive group, BM Central. Okay? Those are the basics. There are some other settings. Shocker. Okay? The one that tends to trip most people up is something called the emit criteria. Okay? So we talk about repeater tails and that kind of a thing and doubling and whatnot. Okay? So emit criteria of always means that it doesn't matter what's going on. When you hit transmit, the radio is just going to transmit come hell or high water. It'll just do whatever its thing. Channel free means that the radio has to wait for the channel to be free before it'll be allowed to transmit, which means in that part of this won't be able to transmit during a repeater tail. What we prefer is color code free. This means that once the color code stops transmitting, you can pick it up and transmit. So even though the repeater tail might be up, as long as nobody's transmitting, you'll still be able to get into the repeater. You don't have to wait for the tail to drop. Okay? This works different ways on different radios. Because of course it does. But that's the one that you need to be most concerned about. Okay? Other things that you want to be aware of, we're not going to talk about scan lists here. But this is, if you have scan lists set up, this is where you can assign a scan list to the channel. This is also where you can set your transmit power. Everybody starts on low, right? Right. If you are programming for a hotspot, please set your channel to low. You don't need to be transmitting out on 5 watts or 25 watts in your house just to reach your hotspot that's 10 feet away. Okay. So that's our channel created. This is, again, the MD380. Let's look at that in the 750-800. Here we actually have to go to the digital channel section, not the analog channel. We're going to add a channel. And this was actually what was in the presentation. So Brandmeister Central, color code 1, slot 2. So the receive, which is the transmit, is 438.6. 438.6. We can all go ahead and populate. Now this one, you can either type this in, or you can use this fancy little thing in here called -5 and hit apply, and it'll calculate it for you. If you are math adverse, I'll use that word. On the receive side, our receive group list. And our transmit side, our transmit contact. And that channel is functionally complete. We have our power level here, because again, this is on the transmit side, because we only care about the transmit power. Receive power isn't a thing. It's the transmit power of the repeater. And then this transmit, admit, color code free. And that's our channel.
Can I encrypt this?
Okay, so can you encrypt it? Yes. Should you encrypt it? No. Is it legal on amateur radio channels? No. Again, you're obfuscating your broadcast. Don't do it. It's in there because DMR is a commercial radio protocol. Thank you. And some companies are allowed to encrypt their things so that people don't overhear their very, very private conversations. All right. Any tone. Whee! Where things get really kind of fun. Channel list. Let's double click in an open spot to create a channel. BM Central. Receive frequency will be 438.6. Transmit will be 433.6. Okay. Let's go down the list. Digital, low power. Transmit permit is, oh, look at this. Same, what? Same color code, different color code. Any tone being any tone. So this will allow you to transmit so long as a different color code is transmitting. Right, but it says it won't let you transmit if the same color. It's very, very confusing. Because it says we'll let you transmit if the same color code is going. It's like, no, that defeats the purpose. Scan list. There's all the APRS stuff we're gonna ignore. Now, this is something for the anytones that tripped me up. DMR mode. If you are trying to transmit to a repeater and this is set to DMO simplex, it will not work. If you try to transmit to a hotspot and this is set to DMO simplex, it will not work. This needs to be set to repeater. This only applies to the 878s and the 578s because the 868s didn't have this concept. So depending on which anytone you have, depends on whether or not you need to be aware of this or not. Because of course. All right. We need to select our talk group. And in the anytone software, you do this with the contact button here. Double click on the one that you want, and then it shows there. Like I said, they put a button where there should be a pull-down menu. I don't know why. There is no logical reason. Again, don't let engineers create interfaces. If you have multiple radio IDs, this is where you would select which radio ID you want assigned to this channel. You only have the one, so it doesn't matter. Color code 1, we're finally at the color code. Slot 2, receive group. So the talk group is a button, but the receive group is a pull-down menu. And our channel's created. Welcome to the fun world of anytone. Wait until you try to do APRS programming on this thing. Okay, enough of that. To the Terra. So we have our channel information list here. We go all the way to the end because the channels go in order, and we're going to add a channel. Note, the channel just adds to the list. If you actually want to see the programming window, you click the double right buttons here, and that brings us up. Now, channel name. I want to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters for the Terra radio. No, I should have stayed in Worcestershire. All right, so transmit frequency, receive frequency, 438.6. Oh, look, we have our offset here, which is kind of cool. There we go. 433.6 for transmit. Digital channel, power low. Contact, which is in a list. BM Central. Scan list none. Now, why did this say RMHAM North, do you think? Why did it default to that? The previous one in the list. It just copied it by default. Yeah, you have to be careful about that. No encryption, color code free, receive group, same reason. We want BM Central. Again, contact list, alphabetical order, receive group list, entry order. Color code 1, slot 2, done. We can close this. We should go back here and see, yes, that all of our settings set. So that is the Terra radio, channel creation. Do we have color code free in here? Oh, it's up here. Yeah, because of that. So there's your color code free at the top. There we go. Double check that.
Worried about the same thing that I am. There's never a dang save button.
It saves as you go. Or it should save as you go. Most of them do it that way. Okay? So it just basically as you go save. Now, you want to, the settings get saved, the code plug does not get saved. If you want to save the code plug, you have to go up to this disk icon, and we're all old enough to understand what a disk is. This one I'm not going to save over, so I will save as demo. Now your code plug is saved to disk. Yay. Okay. Questions on the channel programming for any specific radio or CPS? Welcome to my world. Won't you come on in? No, you'll go nuts. Now we need to make this channel usable for the radio, which means we need to add it to a zone. Very good. Here's our zone. Selection. There's a zone already here. We're going to add a zone. What should we call this zone? We're just going to call this the demo zone. Because it's a demo. And I'm going to add my BM Central channel to the zone. Terribly difficult stuff, right? In the CS 700, 750, 800, here's your zone. We're going to add a zone. We're going to call this zone demo. Oh, look, it automatically put a channel in there. Why does it automatically put this channel in here? Anybody want to guess? Because in the 750, 800 CPS, you cannot have an empty zone. If you want this added there, you actually have to add a channel, then remove the channel you don't want. Notice how the remove button is now grayed out. Any tone. Like I said, each with their own quirks. You have the channel list at the top. We go to the channel list. Yep, and then zone is underneath it. It can have an empty channel. We're going to call this demo. We're going to add BM Central to it. We're not going to get into this A channel, B channel stuff up here because, again, I don't want to go off on another rant. But that's how you add the channel to the zone. Again, very simple. The Terra. The hard part, I think the hard part is behind us. Or the frustrating part is behind us. We have zones. Looks very much like your receive groups. Notice that they're not alphabetized. Call this demo. We'll find our BM. This is, again, these are, if you look at the naming games that I had to go through for the channels when you're only limited to 10 characters. I think it did pretty well given the resources available. There's BM Central. Again, can't have an empty zone. So if you want this to only have the one in there, you actually have to add the channel in and then remove the channel that you don't want. Okay. You can save it. And your file is saved. And it's ready to upload to your radio. And you'll have this zone to select from your zone selection list to activate it and activate the channel. Questions? Very cool. So that is what I had prepared today. Okay?
My CS 750 CPS, there's a radio information that contains the model name, the model number, and a bunch of stuff like that. if I just created this code plug, am I gonna break my radio if I now save it to the radio without having loaded that information in the first place?
No, I think what happens, from my experience, your mileage may vary, and of course it may change with the firmware. Once you upload it to a radio and re-download it, the CPS will have the proper information for your radio. I've never seen it changing that brick of radio. Knock wood. Question?
Comment. One with the Anytones, the 578 that I found is useful is it does have an import and export feature that if you want to do, put one channel in or export it, do some spreadsheet gymnastics and import it back in. So if you've got a lot of channels and building a code plug, I found that is something kind of good to play with. Mileage may vary, but it helps rather than hitting all of the drop downs at any one time.
Yep. The export function is fantastic at the Anytone. One of the selling points of it. Something to be careful of when you're exporting and importing things, especially the channel list. When you open up that spreadsheet that it exports to, there is a channel number column. So let's say that you export the sample code plug, and there's like 200 channels in it. And you have your own channel list, and that channel list has like channels 1 through 10. When you import your list, the 1 through 10 will overwrite the channel 1 through 10 in your sample because the channel numbers matched up. So you have to be careful to watch your channel numbers when you're importing. But the import-export feature is it's fantastic. It's absolutely awesome. And this is actually how I do, when I create all my Anytone code plugs, the 878 CPS, I use the export, and then I use the import feature to create the 578 and the 868. That's how I do it to save time.
That I've noticed, because I've built several code plugs from scratch, use the RMHAM website, is noticing the transmit and the receive frequencies for the repeaters we've got in Colorado are different than the ones in New Mexico. And so you've got to pay attention which ones you put in, or you're going to get them backwards. A lot of the times you figure, hey, we'll put the high side in here and the low side there.
Yep.
But I know that's got me a couple times building code plugs from scratch.
I try really, really hard not to create code plugs from scratch anymore. It is mindless data entry. Really. Now, there was also a comment during the break that in the Anytone world, the latest versions of the firmware for the 878s and the 578s now use a common CPS. Hallelujah. I haven't gotten to that point yet because I've been busy doing other things, but that's going to be a time saver for me. The 868 uses an older chip, and they basically have now plateaued that particular CPS and firmware. So it is now like Latin. It's not going to change going forward, which is good and bad, but it is what it is. So there was that.
So I programmed my radio like you said, and when I press the button, it says call failed.
That means you can't reach the repeater. It's probably because you're inside a building that works as a Faraday cage.
So what repeater am I actually talking to here?
What does your display say?
DM Central?
It was a sample. Like I said, I had hotspot issues. I meant to bring my hotspot in. For various reasons, it didn't make it. So no, we were going to try with a hotspot, but that is not possible this morning, unfortunately. Now,
So to use this example, I need to be able to connect to a Brandmeister repeater?
yes.
Any Brandmeister repeater?
If it's set up in the default fashion, yes. Your
So-
mileage may vary. Check the website for the repeater.
So all the Brandmeister repeaters are on 438-600?
No, you would have to change the frequency pair to match. Check the information of the repeater that you are using. And RMHAM doesn't have any.
Do I just need to change the frequency, or do I also need to change the color code and the time slot?
You'll need to change the color code to match the repeater, obviously. The time slot, you would have to see whether or not the time slot will allow user-activated time slots or talk groups or not. Most do. But again, check the website for the repeater to get information on that particular repeater.
So if I want to try this at home,
This is Willem going at me here.
Where do I find the information that I would actually apply what you just taught me here on a real repeater so I can talk to a real site?
Well, if you're talking about Brandmeister, I might recommend the Brandmeister website, which is brandmeister.network. Now, this may take a little while to load just because what I'm about to show you is very data intensive. If you go to the information section here, go to the network map. This will show you all the active repeaters on the Brandmeister network. Oh, that was actually speedier than it was before. You may end up needing to zoom in. Zooming in is fun. You can see the repeaters here. Let's look at the layers. I want to show, yep, repeaters, active stations. And so here's a repeater. If I click on this repeater, it gives you the call sign and the information. If you click on the call sign, it'll take you to the repeater page. And on that repeater page, it'll show you not only the model and whatnot, the transmit and receive frequencies, the color code, and if there's any time slots that are static on that repeater. Now, Brandmeister, by default, if you set up a repeater in default fashion, works on a concept of user-activated talk groups, which means you told that there's no talk groups active except for that one. The way that this works is that if you want to talk out on Brandmeister on a specific talk group, all you have to do is key up on that talk group, on that repeater, and the repeater will activate that talk group on that time slot, on that repeater. And it'll stay open, I think by default, for 10 minutes. Until somebody locally transmits again on that time slot, on that talk group, on that repeater, in which case the 10-minute timer is reset. Okay? That is what makes Brandmeister so powerful, is that any user, by default, can get access to any Brandmeister talk group on any Brandmeister repeater anywhere in the world. That is the Brandmeister concept. Okay? RMHAM does not use it. And if you don't have a repeater in your area, you can get or build personal hotspots you can have in your room to connect to the internet. That's a different session. Whole different session.
Apply the code plug that we just built to this machine, what I would have to do is on the last thing that we do, the channel, is I need to go and fill in that frequency,
Yep.
the color code,
Well, the color code's 1, so that matches.
and the time slot.
Time slot's open is open here as well. You may not, unless you knock into 310842.
So can I just go to the channel and change those things? I don't have to re-add it to the zone?
Correct. You can edit the channel, but you have to edit the channel, save the code plug, reload the code plug up to your radio.
And then I'm going to connect to Dick's Brandmeister machine?
Yep. As long as you're in range and your handheld can reach it, yes.
Thank you. And I put this on one of the RMHAM machines, what will happen?
It will stop at the repeater and nothing will happen.
I think something will happen. You'll get a call from
Oh,
John.
you'll get a call from us too. But it won't function in any way because we're not connected to the Brandmeister network, and it will make some people very grumpy for doing something this. 1, interfering with normal operation of the repeater, and 2, not accomplishing anything.
Or if I don't have the right information, how do I know that it's not working?
Because nobody will answer you. Now, if you key up on a repeater that's not answering, if you're out of range, it'll say out of range. If it's busy, you'll get a busy signal. So it's in that way, it's a little bit more convenient and than analog. But if you're out of range, it will tell you that the radio can't contact the repeater. So there's at least that, whether it's out of range or you're in a Faraday cage or you're not transmitting on enough power or your antenna doesn't work or something, or you have the wrong frequency put in. Never discount the element of human error. Lord knows I've made my set of mistakes in the samples. And I always say, if you see something, let me know so I can correct it. But it is entirely possible for you not to be able to operate if your frequencies are reversed or if you mistyped one number in your frequency. Yeah, it's not going to work.
So I wanted to make a comment here. They were wondering what a bonk was.
Oh, bonk.
So here's an interesting situation that I'm going to have to sit down because this camera is very, very tight. When you're trying to talk to a repeater that's not in range or that you do not have it correctly programmed,
It's a live demo, guys.
this is a bonk. When you push to talk and it's not talking to the repeater, this is what you're going to hear. This is a dead giveaway that something got programmed incorrectly in the code plug. This is not a Chinese radio, but they work the same way.
Yes. All right. So at this point, we have some time left. You know, we won't keep you longer here than what we want to put in, but at this point, we open it up to any and all DMR open questions. We probably won't go into any deep detail on things like hotspots or anything, just because we don't have the ability to do that at the moment. But if you have questions in-house, questions on the Zoom they'd like to bring up, this is the time to do it. In-house. Roaming. Oh, let's go. Let's all go roaming. When in Rome. So I have a very particular spot in the deep pit of my stomach for roaming. And I say my stomach because my stomach is deeper than my heart. In the amateur radio world, roaming isn't as useful as it is in the commercial world. Okay? There are Chinese radios that support roaming, right? Terra, was it Terra? No, it was Terra. Had a amateur radio focus, and I do that with massive quotes that did roaming. The Anytones have a roaming feature. The Kenwoods do. How much does the Kenwood radio cost? Yeah. Yeah. Is Kenwood technically a Chinese radio? Okay. No, they have it. Of course, the Motorola's do it. Now, the reason why comes down to the talk groups. Okay? Because generally speaking, and I'm grossly oversimplifying this, okay, so don't get any, well, actually, yeah, I know, but generally oversimplifying. Probably could. You do it because this is out of my realm. When you have the roaming feature turned on, you're giving the radio a set of channels and saying, tune to the channel with the strongest signal. Okay? That's the gross oversimplification. Okay? Now, if you do this with a set of channels that use different talk groups, what is the point? Okay? You're never going to know, unless you look, what talk group you're on, and you might get frustrated because that might not be the talk group that you want to be on. Okay? So, in amateur radio, especially on the RMHAM network, roam works best when you are roaming, or when you're moving around and you want to stay on a single talk group, but you want to be able to always be on the nearest strongest repeater. So if you're doing mobile support for a race or something like that, right? Or you're going up and down I-25 and you want to stay on Rocky Mountain, it works great. Outside of that, it is functionally useless, because it only works really well when it's predictable what talk group you're going to be on, which limits you to a single talk group. Can't scan and roam at the same time. Doesn't function that way. Okay? You have to choose one or the other concept. Right? So that is my rant on roaming.
So you're saying when in Rome, stay on one talk group?
I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that. When in Rome or OAM, yes, DMR talk group.
I've got one from Zoom. Dennis N0 ABC wanted us to remind everybody that the Colorado Council of Amateur Radio Clubs has defined a set of recommended hotspot frequencies. Mike, do you want to talk to that a little more?
Yes, guess where I got the frequency for my hotspot? 438.6 is a hotspot frequency from that list.
Are there hotspot frequencies on VHF?
No, because I've never heard of a VHF hotspot. I can't imagine the electronics and for the antenna transmit and receive would be too big to fit in a hotspot, I would think. But that's just me. CCARC hotspot. Doing a Google search, because it's quicker for me. There's the page. So if you just Google CCARC hotspot, the first link in Google comes up here, and there's your hotspot frequencies. Set aside for you. But I've never seen a VHF hotspot. They have them, but I was like, I've never seen them. Have you? Interesting. Okay. Yes. What does CCARC stand for? Colorado Council. So every state has their own frequency coordination organization. So if you're not in Colorado on the Zoom, you'll need to go to your frequency coordination organization's website for this information. John.
Well, it's not illegal to use other channels. We like to be good RF neighbors. And this list is a way to try to keep this off of simplex channels. And we do hear a lot
Yes.
of complaints from folks trying to use simplex channels that, hey, there's a hotspot on my channel. Well, it's
yeah.
not your channel,
Yes.
but this is a way to try to keep that to a minimum.
There's always the concept in amateur radios of best operating practices. Frequency coordination falls into that category for me, right? So do everybody a favor, go to the website and use these for your hotspots. It'll keep everybody happy and working better together.
Your amateur radio brethren in the state of Colorado got together and put this list out to try to solve some of these problems.
Yes.
It's a gentleman's agreement, and it's not absolutely set in stone, but use your good judgment.
Yeah.
And remember that there's a lot of people
Absolutely.
vying for these resources.
There's stories about the Zoom Spot hats for Raspberry Pi that in earlier firmwares defaulted to a frequency that interfered with the moon bounce channels or whatever like that. And there was a lot of consternation and bad blood between those two organizations because of that. They fixed that in the latest firmware where they kept it within a certain range where you couldn't go that far down. But yeah, it's a lesson in, again, being good neighbors and doing frequency coordination. Good question and good comment from the Zoom. Thank you.
Maybe you could add that link to your stuff slide.
May have to.
Okay, so when I turn my radio on, it says RMHAM, Cent E, Squaw Rocky Mountain. If I just leave it set on there, what can I hear?
Hold on just a second. Colorado hotspot frequencies. Boom.
Thank you.
Okay. So again,
Okay, but I turn it on after my call and all, it says RMHAM Central E,
yep.
Squaw Rocky Mountain, so that means I'm talking to the Squaw Rocky Mountain repeater,
So the first part of that, which was the RMHAM Central E,
right?
that is the name of the zone that is currently active.
Right.
Okay? Yes. The Squaw Rocky Mountain is the channel,
Okay.
and the name of the channel. Now, in our sample code plugs, the way that we name our channels is by the name of the repeater, followed by the talk group. Because we are simple people and we need to understand what that channel means, right? So that means that you would be transmitting to the Squaw repeater, and you'd be transmitting on the Rocky Mountain talk group, which by convention is time slot 1. So the Rocky Mountain talk group on time slot 1 on the squall repeater.
Okay, now, okay, so while the radio's sitting there on that setting,
Yep.
what can I expect to hear? Usually if I'm have it on, I don't hear anything.
Right. So if you are within range of the squall repeater, you should hear anytime somebody keys up on the Rocky Mountain talk group. 35 repeaters. Yep.
Okay.
It's all connected together. So if you key up on Rocky Mountain on any repeater in our network, it'll transmit out on Rocky Mountain on all the repeaters that have Rocky Mountain on in the
Okay,
repeater.
but it's by talk group.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. That's why we have these classes. Yep, absolutely.
So
Here
my,
goes-
my
here goes-
biggest frustration with DMR is there's an event at some obscure location that's not my house. And they say, we're going to use this and this repeater, and I program that into my radio, but I cannot hit that repeater from my house.
Okay. So let's
How
talk.
can I be sure that that's going to work when I'm out in the field where I don't have a programming cable with me?
So if you're actually going to be at the house during the event, right? Understand what repeaters are in your area, first of all, and then understand what talk groups are on those repeaters. Okay. So if you're sitting in, let's say, what example can we use here? Let's say you're out in Lyman, and you can't get to an event that is in the northern part of the state, right? And you want to be able to listen in on that event, even though it's nowhere in your area. The event's going to be happening, and as I said, they're going to be using the North Talk Group. Well, you don't have to be on a repeater near the event because there is a Lyman repeater that carries the North Talk Group. You just key into the local Lyman repeater on the North Talk Group. All the activity gets repeated around the North Talk Group on all the North repeaters. You'll be able to listen in. And if you wanted to, not recommended unless you're part of the event, you could actually transmit in, but you'll definitely be able to listen in, right? If you are in a place that has no repeaters near you, your next best thing is to get a hotspot. Well, you have to have a hotspot for the radio part of that. But a hotspot will allow you to get out on the Brandmeister. And in our network, we have 3 of our talk groups connected, bridged through Brandmeister talk groups that you can send and receive on through Brandmeister.
There's 20 settings that I have to set for a channel. Is there a way that I can build a channel that works for one of the local repeaters so that the only change that I need to make for using this other repeater that I can't hit now, that the only thing I need to change is the frequency?
Yeah, it's called copy and paste. Which now, not all CPSs, I'm looking at UCS 380, support copy and paste. So if we go into, let's say, the Anytone. Okay? Here's my channel list. There's this channel that I made. Copy, paste. Now the only thing it changes is this little thing here, right? So let's say I wanted this to be on, what was that repeater that we were on in Brandmeister, the Brandmeister website? WA0DE. Okay. And then we'll change the frequencies. Its transmit frequency is 445-0875. 0875. 440-0875. Okay. Frequency is different. All the other settings came over. Let's check the color code. Color code is 1. We're going to go ahead and go on time slot 2 because no one said we couldn't. Hit OK. There you go. Copy and paste. Change the name of the channel. Change the frequency. Done. Saves you bunches and bunches of time.
That works in most radios.
Most CPSs support copy and paste like that. Yes.
So now that will show up in the zone automatically?
Nope. You still have to add it to the zone. Which isn't always a desirable experience. Because if you have multiple zones, what zone does it add it to? Now it's added to the zone. Save, upload. Now your zone has 2 channels that you can switch between. Comes naturally to me because I've been doing this for so long. It's just remembering in each CPS, okay, how do I do that in that CPS? Transmit group button. Yes. Other questions, comments? Open forum? Bueller? Seems like the longer time goes on, the more grumpy I get about things in DMR. Just wish they would stop doing silly things in the CPS. That'd be nice. All right. John, that just might be it.
So I have a question about programming cables.
Yep.
So Dick and I were just talking about the fact that my CS750 programming cable looks exactly like the one he has for, was this an Anytone? Can I use my CS programming cable with an Anytone radio and vice versa?
I'll give you my standard answer to it, which is you can certainly try it. If it doesn't work, you have your answer. Chances are, no.
But
Chances are very, very good that no, it will not work.
the plugs look exactly the same, and it fit in the hole.
Like I said, give it a shot. There are some radios that actually use, shocker of shockers, standard USB cables. Way too smart. The Anytone 578 uses a mini USB connector. Who would have thunk it? It's almost like the European Union thought so strongly about this that they decided to standardize. Yeah, every radio is different, as we all know. It's just like I said, if you lose the cable, pretty much your only recourse is to go back to the reseller or the manufacturer and order another one. It's just the way that works. You want to now even beyond that, the same thing happens with different headsets and the plugs for microphones and headsets. Same game. And I have been known to lose money by ordering the wrong cable extender and whatnot. Always a fun experience. Your compatibility may vary. Void will prohibit it. See stores for details. All right.
Any last questions from the Zoom? Did we clear out the chat?
John Wells made a comment that for Anytone, you can turn off STE to receive the weather channels, which of course is an analog channel.
Yep. I had completely forgotten that.
STE, is that CTCSS?
Yeah, I completely forgot the Anytones have the weather channel support, weather radio support. I've forgotten about that. You get what you pay for. You pay your money. You get your features. All right, so what have we learned today? All Chinese CPSs are not made the same. They're not all equal. Your level of frustration may vary. Do your research up front before you buy. Highly recommend that you buy a radio for which sample code plugs are already available. Try to avoid the, ooh, shiny new thing aspect of the hobby, especially for your first radio until you can get in and start getting your feet wet. Programming isn't nearly as hard as you might think it is. You will get to know your CPS, and once you learn how to program your radio, you will finally be in control of your fate. As long as you're within reach of a computer. Absolutely. Thank you for.
Well, in terms of code plugs and radios, what would you say is the most popular radio in this area?
Right now, the Unitones, without doubt. Not the cheapest, not the most affordable out of the gate, but definitely the most popular.
So what are we talking about? Several $100 or $100? How much are the Anytones roughly?
Well, let's go to the HRO website. Because we're not salespeople, we don't deal in that aspect. But here we have at HRO a D578 UV plus III plus, because naming conventions like in the Chinese radios are the same as anything else. That's the mobile radio, looking at 460. The handheld version of that is 320. Okay? That's kind of where they are, as far as these are the ones that are the current models.
20 DMR radio.
220. Oh,
It's a
remember
tri-bander.
analog channels. So they do support what is that, 1.2 meter? 1.25 meter analog amateur radio channels. So that's why you would do that. I don't know of any repeaters on that band.
So I see the 578 UV Pro says with Bluetooth. Does that mean you can program it with Bluetooth?
The Bluetooth is there for audio, so for headsets and microphones, and also they have a push-to-talk button that works off Bluetooth. Connected to car audio, yeah, absolutely. So if your car has Bluetooth, connectivity, pop your radio in, have it go through your car's. Because some cars, if you can talk on your phone, your car has a microphone. Possibilities. And then you have the button so that you don't have to take your hand off the wheel to transmit. Anytone is, they do some weird things, some quirky things in the CPS, but at least they're thinking more towards the amateur radio functionality side of things and actually putting features in. That is the upside to the Anytone. And they are also the first one out of the gate with an actual workable, viable, functional, dual band amateur radio DMR radio.
CSI come out with the 800D for
Nope. No, the Anytones came out with the HT before, the 868 before the 800D.
yes.
Isn't Black Friday's coming up soon? Yeah.
Up 2 weeks. So with that, thank you very much for everybody for attending. I will again remind you that RMHAM is a 501c3. And we were just talking here that we are actually looking to spend quite a lot of money in the thousands of dollars on some new upgraded camera equipment that will make our lives easier when we go on the road. So our next RMHAM University is in this room. It's Bob Whitty talking about test equipment, and specifically he's going to talk about things like VNAs, where you've brought this shiny new VNA. What do you do with it? And things like that. So hope to see you here on December the 10th. And then for our January RMHAM University, we're actually taking the show on the road. So that one is on 3D printing. And for that, we're actually going to go to James Sizek's house so that he doesn't have to bring his whole basement down here to show us how to do 3D printing. So we're looking forward to those presentations. And please consider us in your charitable giving, because it helps us bring you very entertaining as well as very informative talks such as this. So thank you, Mike. Thank you to our AV crew, and thank you for everybody attending, and we'll see you same bat channel, same bat time at the beginning of next month.
Awesome.